Hey, we are going to look at some vocabulary in this lesson. So keep that in mind. I want you to open up your notebook to the words worth knowing section and you're going to add 6 words. I only have 4 of them up here, but you're going to add 6 words. Our very first word that we're going to add, so if you're not there yet, you might want to pause and get these 4 words written down so you are at least at the right place. Very first word we're going to add is ratio. Ratios are a comparison of 2 quantities using division. So, comparison of 2 quantities using division. So, comparison of 2 quantities. I did QTY for that one. Quantities using division. So, for example, we would be looking at things like this. 1/12, okay? 1 quantity, 2 quantities, separated by a fraction bar, which is a gigantic fraction, or which is a gigantic division problem. We can write ratios in 3 different ways. We can write them as A divided by B. Let's wait for that. There we go. A divided by B. We can say A to B with a colon in between, or we could write A to B with an actual word of 2, okay? You can write ratios in 3 different ways. Ratios also have a few different parts to them. We can look at them in terms of part-to-part ratios or part-to-whole ratios. Part-to-part ratios, it would be something like me looking at my entire classroom, but looking at parts of it. So saying the number of kids who are wearing sandals versus the other kids that are wearing different shoes, like normal tennis shoes or something like that. So that's one part, the kids who wear sandals. The other part is kids who wear tennis shoes, okay? That's looking at 2 parts. I might have 3 people who wear sandals and 14 people who wear tennis shoes, and I can say that's a 3 to 14 ratio. We could also look at part-to-whole ratios, saying like, okay, those same kids who wear sandals versus the number of kids in the whole class. We have 3 kids who wear sandals and there's 17 total kids in the class. So that's a 3 to 17 ratio. Okay, so we can look at the whole thing with one part sort of being highlighted, or we can look and highlight 2 different parts. Okay, comparison of 2 quantities using division. Proportions. This is essentially saying we have 2 ratios and they are equivalent to each other. So we can put them together with an equal sign in between. So this is 2 ratios that are equivalent. So for example, 1/12 is equal to the same thing as 2/24. These 2 ratios, I can simplify this ratio to be 1/12. So these are equivalent. We can also say, well, I could just double this up and I can say times 2 times 2 and I get 2/24. They are equivalent. They are 2 ratios that are equivalent. So for example, if I were to say, in any classroom, there's always 1 person who wears a hat out of the 12 people in that classroom. So if I had 24 kids in that classroom, I'd say, oh yeah, there's going to be 2 kids that wear hats or whatever. Okay, so proportion, 2 ratios that are equivalent. Remember, a good words worth knowing entry has a definition and an example. If need be, it has a little bit more to that example. We can also draw pictures of these things. So we can say 12 kids, 1 hat, 24 kids, 2 hats, right? To show that. I'm not going to do that because it's a pretty big ratio. Next one, rate. Rates are a ratio of 2 different quantities with different labels, or 2 quantities with different labels. So it's a ratio of 2 quantities. Again, I'm going to use QTY for that. 2 different quantities, ratio of 2 quantities with different labels. So for example, we would maybe talk about my dad using, or like driving for 200 miles and using 5 gallons of gas. Okay, he has a Prius. Okay, so 200 miles, 5 gallons of gas. So if we were to look at that, we could then go and take that to a unit rate. So notice these had two different labels. We had miles versus gallons, different labels. And now we can take this to a unit rate and actually figure out his miles per gallon. So unit rate is taking a ratio and making sure the second number of that ratio, so this one in the denominator in this case, but the second number is 1, okay? Unit rate is a ratio of two quantities with the second quantity being 1. So we use unit rates often when we talk about miles per gallon, or when we talk about how much something weighs for its density or something like that, or how fast something can go, or how fast something accelerates. So let's look at my dad's miles per gallon in his Prius. If he is 200 miles to 5 gallons, if I wanted to get this into its actual unit rate, I would divide the top and the bottom by 5, because I want 5 divided by 5 to equal 1, right? So I get 1 gallon. And 200 miles divided by 5 will get me 40 miles. So his Prius gets 40 miles per gallon, which is ideal, right? Or if not more, that would be sweet. Cool. So there's 4 of our words worth knowing. Now we need to add 2 more. You need to go back 3 seconds so you can see all of those definitions if you haven't written them all down. Our next 2 definitions are conversion factor. I can spell conversion factor and cross product property, which we will get in more in our 3rd video for this lesson. Conversion factor. This is a special ratio that in and of itself is kind of equal to each other. So we're looking at 2 different quantities that are equal, okay? So it's a rate where the quantities are equivalent. I like that word. Nice word of saying equal. So the 2 quantities are equivalent. So an example of this would be something like this: 12 inches versus 1 foot. 12 inches and 1 foot are equal to 1. If we were to think about that, 12 inches is 1 foot, right? So technically, I have a conversion factor. If I were to think about this, this is the same thing. This is equal to 1. So if I were to look at that, I mean, that's equal to 1. Another example of this could be like 5,280 feet is equal to 1 mile. Those are equal. That's a conversion factor that is equal to 1. Another one, 2.2 pounds is equal to 1 kilogram. That is equal to 1. Okay, conversion factor allows us to move between labels really, really nicely. And we're going to be looking at that even more when we get into dimensional analysis with our lesson 3.7, 3.8. Last thing that we're going to talk about, cross product property. Cross product property is a way for us to deal with proportions. It essentially says that cross products of a proportion are equal. So I'll look at this in terms of general terms, and then I'll show you an example. So that's like saying A over B is equal to C over D, and cross products are essentially telling us that A times D is equal to, let's see if I can do this, B times C. So let's look now at, actually I'll leave that open. Let's look now at an example so you can see if this is truly the case. We're looking at something like this. We'll say, oh, what is my example? Okay, 2/3 is equal to 4/6. Just a sec. 2/3 is equal to 4/6. So cross product property will tell me that I have 3 times 4 is equal to 2 times 6. 2 times 6 is equal to 12. 3 times 4 is equal to 12. So then that essentially is showing us that the cross product property sort of works. Cool? It's a nice way to deal with proportions. We're going to look at this more when we get to our third video for this lesson. Thanks for watching.
Holy shit, you work so much harder.